Hello, stress management students. This is your first video of the week in the lecture series. There are two lecture videos this week. This one on the stress emotion fear. There's a second one. It should be a pretty short one on loneliness. And I've added that to this section because the experiencing loneliness also produces stress hormones. And so I wanted to include that into the discussion in this section, even though fear and anger are the two stress emotions. Um, so please be sure to understand that fear and anger are the two stress emotions, but I'm just adding loneliness into this portion because I think it's important to address it and to understand it. It's an area that's being researched much more so these days. So, this first lecture on fear, it's helpful to watch it before you start your worry activity this week. However, if you want to jump right into that activity, you could do that. Just be sure and watch I think it's like an 8-minute video that explains how to do the activity. Um, so let's go ahead and get started. So remember, fear is considered the flight emotion, FLIGHT. And just like with anger, there are a lot of different shades of fear. Fear is kind of that umbrella emotion. And we might also, when we hear that word fear, think of, a pretty strong emotion. But there are all these different shades that have, I guess you could say, slightly different flavors or feels to them. I've listed a few here, but there are many more. Doubt, embarrassment, anxiety, apprehension, insecurity, worry, overwhelm. These are all considered to be shades or degrees or types of that fear emotion. In this section, what we're primarily going to be dealing with is worry. Last week, you had a video that was specific to anxiety. But we're just going to move right into this emotion of worry this week. So, first of all, with fear, there are considered to be two types of fear, rational and irrational. Now, rational fear is fear that makes sense, it's warranted. For example, if you're on a camping trip and it's the middle of the night and a bear breaks into your tent, the fear that you would experience in that case is warranted. Or if you're out for a walk late at night and you're going down an alley, you're alone, and someone starts running at you, that's maybe a warranted type of fear. Okay, this second type of fear, irrational, we think of it as being unwarranted. It's usually the stuff that we make up in our heads, and a lot of times it's what if statements or imagining these scary stories that could happen in the future. And so really what we're going to be dealing with, in this particular lecture falls more into the category of what we call irrational or unwarranted fear. Now, I always like to mention in this section this idea that fear, it really can limit us. And I love this expression, life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. And I have a hunch that maybe some of you have experienced how, if we are pretty fearful or pretty worrisome, um, our life can really shrink. It can get much smaller. We can become much more hesitant to get out and go and to do things. And so when it comes to holistic stress management, one of the ideas with regard to fear is that we move away from letting fear be a motivating factor in our decisions, and that we move more towards, what this is the way the author of the text referred to it, as a motivation of love, or you could think also compassion. And I think what's interesting to consider is when you in your life are making decisions, to what degree is your decision being motivated by fear or by worry or anxiety? Or is what is motivating your decision more based in love, perhaps what you're passionate about or what you really want to do? And, I can look back on my life, and I think I'm a really good example of how my undergraduate degree was motivated by fear. Um, Initially, when I started school, um, I wanted to be a kinesiology, or back then it was called physical education. I wanted to be a physical education major. And at that time, there was really just kind of one track you could go with physical education, and that was to become a teacher. Um, and, when I got into the beginning of my junior year, it really sunk in that if I was going to be a physical education major, that I would have to student teach. When I was a freshman, that seemed so far into the future, it wasn't really bothering me. But when I got to my junior year, it was more on my doorstep. And I was very, very afraid of the idea of student teaching. I wanted to be a physical education major, but I was afraid of this piece of my education that I was going to have to do if I wanted to complete that degree. So fear made a decision, or I allowed fear to make this decision for me. I actually decided to change my major, and I went with something that was closely related but did not require me to student teach. So, and what was kind of ironic is then, I got out of school and worked in that area for a year and a half or so and discovered I didn't actually really enjoy it. I was behind a desk all day. And so I decided I would go back and get my master's degree. And the only way that I was going to be able to afford to do my master's degree was to accept some type of, or get some type of a position that offered financial assistance. And the only position that was available to me was to be a teaching assistant. So what I had avoided ended up becoming necessary for me to be able to follow through with that second plan. And I found out that I actually loved teaching. So, kind of long story short here, really think about this, because I think it's real easy for fear to sneak in and guide some of our choices, or to become a more motivating factor. And, the idea with stress management is we become aware of when it is, and that we're able to somehow support ourselves through that fear so that we can stay more aligned with what actually is inspiring to us, or those things that we truly want, the things that we truly love. Okay, and in the field of psychology, one of the key questions that psychology is always looking at is what motivates behavior. And for a lot of us, it is fear, at least at some times. And that the idea of moving towards that motivation of love, you have to really kind of dig down deep into some of these inner qualities, these inner resources, and develop them even more fully to overcome that fear, that sense of fear. And it can be patience with ourselves, it can be for self-forgiveness, it can be utilizing optimism, really digging down deep and finding our courage and practicing courage. So, those are some important things to also think about, how it really is a huge thing for us to be able to lean on these. And when we're feeling fear, to be able to turn inward and find these types of qualities to help ourselves move through that so that we can indeed stay aligned with what it is we truly want to do. Now, I'm going to also post a video. It'll be entitled Comfort Zone Challenges. It's one that I've shown in class for the last 2 or 3 semesters, and it's kind of cool. It might it might be inspiring, or it might inspire you to start practicing courage, and do it real intention and practicing courage in a real intentional or deliberate way. And so I would encourage you to watch that Comfort Zone Challenge video. It's kind of a cool story, and also I want to say the guy that's speaking in it. Um, Initially, it might be a little difficult to understand. He has an accent that's a little thick, but there are subtitles, and or it is closed captioned. And I know for me, once I listened to the first couple of minutes, I was hearing it more clearly. So go for it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and look more directly now at this thing called worry. And I think all of us probably understand what this is. How worry gets defined, though, is it says to feel uneasy or concerned about something, to be troubled. And it's interesting when I think about worry, I a lot of times go to it being just a thinking process. And I will sometimes forget the emotions that go along with worry. And I like this description or this definition of worry because out of the gate it says to feel. So with worry, there is this emotional tone, this feeling that goes with worry, and the feeling is oftentimes being created by the thoughts that we are having. So how we're thinking actually produces the emotional response. And this semester we started the semester with really exploring how we think about things and trying to connect even more so with what the thoughts are that go through our mind. And we were addressing optimism at that time, but with worry, it becomes equally important to really start tuning in to how we think about things and what the consequence of that is. So what I'm going to be taking you through are, I believe it's five strategies for working with worry. And I think one thing that's helpful to understand right at the get-go is chronic worry, or excessive worry. You could almost think of it in that way. It's just a mental habit, and it is a habit that you can learn to break. And what's kind of cool is in the process of trying to break the habit, um, you get to experience improvement along the way. You find yourself not worrying nearly as much, so you almost get some pain relief along the way. Um, so let's look at this first strategy. And what all these strategies are about are really trying to get us to do something different than just sit and worry. And I don't know if you've noticed that with worry, there's a tendency to sometimes feel a bit frozen, like you can't move or you can't move forward, or it's tough to take action. Worry has this effect of kind of freezing you up. And so what we want to be able or what we want to learn to do is when we're experiencing worry, we want to identify it and then move into some sort of strategy versus just staying in the cycle of worry. And this first strategy, I give it an A plus for creativity. I actually really like this strategy. I've had some students in class who have experimented with it and tried it. Some have said they really liked doing it. Others have said it did not work for me. And so this is a real individual type decision to be making whether or not a strategy will work for you. Also, strategies don't usually work the first time or the second time or the third time. You have to practice them. You have to really stay with it and give it a chance to work. So, this first strategy is all about creating something that they call a worry period. And to sum it up, what you're going to do with this strategy is identify a specific time, and I would also suggest location, which will be your worry zone or your worry period. So let's just pretend that I decide that 3 p.m. Under the tree outside is my worry period for the day. So, and what I will then do is at 3 p.m., I can go sit under the tree and I am allowed to worry about whatever I want to during that period of time. However, all the other minutes through the course of the day are considered to be a worry-free time. So, if a worry comes up at any of those other times, what I could do is just make a note of it on my phone or on a notepad or whatever, put it in my pocket, and I take it with me to my worry period. So, what's really cool about this is you're really kind of marking, I get to worry during this time, but all the rest of this time, it's worry free. I don't worry. Now, the worry period, I said 3 p.m. You might actually, say something like, my worry period's gonna be from 3 to 3:30. So there's an ending mark with your worry period also. And then too, if at 3 p.m. if you sit down and you go, okay, I'm allowed to worry about whatever I want to worry about. If at 3:10 you've kind of drawn a blank and there are no more worries, you can end your worry zone early. You don't have to stay there and try to invent more worries. So that's this last part. You can always cut your worry period short. Okay, so strategy number 2. This one has a couple of steps, and it's the strategy itself is focused on identifying, well, is the worry that I'm having, is it solvable? And just right out of the gate here, something that's important to understand is that worrying and problem solving are not the same thing. And I think it can get a little tricky because, I know that when I'm worrying, I can sometimes convince myself that I'm solving a problem when I'm really not doing anything other than just sitting and worrying, which is not very productive. And it can also be pretty painful. So with regard to determining this, there are some questions you can ask yourself. And here are those 3 questions that I've listed. Is the problem something you are currently facing rather than a what if? When we're doing that what if stuff or imagining things that could happen, those aren't really solvable. There's no direct action you could maybe take right now. Perhaps in some cases there is. But we're really looking at something that's more reality based, not necessarily that what if. Okay, is the problem if the problem is an imaginary what if? How likely is it to happen? Is your concern realistic? So, when those what if worries come up, and maybe there isn't really a true action you could take, one approach you can use to address that what if kind of thing is to ask yourself, is this even realistic? And if I'm not sure, well, how likely is it to actually happen? And if we can get ourselves to be really honest in those situations, I think that can be really helpful, because I know a lot of the what ifing that I have done is not at all realistic, and it's not at all likely to happen. Um, and then, another question is, can you do something about the problem, or can you prepare for it? So these can lead us into some helpful actions if we really look at, is there something that I can do about it? Or is there a way I can prepare for this situation? Or, is it something that's just out of your control? So these are good questions to start with. And then we're going to move into um, this next part of this strategy. Now, solvable worries are those you can take action on right away. Unsolvable worries are those for which there is no corresponding action. So after you've looked at those three questions, you can kind of decide, is this one of those solvable worries, or is it an unsolvable worry? And if you've determined that the worry is solvable, the response should be to take action. Now, in your activity this week, we're really focused on this idea of whether or not the worry is solvable or unsolvable. And I'm asking you in either case to come up with a corresponding action. I'm actually asking you to take action. And I bet most of you can relate to how, if you can get yourself to take some sort of action, um, generally what happens is the worry is really alleviated, or you feel much better. I know that so oftentimes the things that I will tend to worry about, um, in a lot of cases, what's going on is I just need more information. So a corresponding action might be to call someone and ask questions. And inevitably, once I get answers to my questions or I get something clarified, I feel much better. So it's about getting ourselves kind of to rally up, to get out of our heads and do something. Act now. Okay, so I've jumped around just a little bit here. Okay, so now if you determine that it's not solvable, if it's maybe one of those kind of imaginary what ifs, well, this slide's really talking about how, worry, I've mentioned this, how it can kind of keep us in our heads. We can start to feel frozen. When you're up in your head, you don't tend to be feeling a lot, you're just thinking a lot. And staying up in your head can sometimes be a pretty scary place to be, because one thought can lead to another thought, to another thought, to another thought. This third bullet point, being in your head can result in, and sometimes these thoughts come up: what's wrong with me? I shouldn't feel this way. So it's kind of like we're adding that second arrow, or that second dart, or that second painful sentence in our heads, where that can produce even more worry. So what's suggested is to just let yourself drop down into your body and really feel. what's going on. And the feeling that goes along with worry is not a pleasant one. If you can learn to support yourself somehow and support yourself through those feelings, to accept them versus fight with them versus judge them, that's going to be much more beneficial. And with your worry activity this week, there is a question in there that actually is asking you, if the worry was not solvable, um, how can you help yourself? And you have to actually identify a strategy for helping yourself through those worrisome feelings. So this is strategy number 2, identifying if the problem is solvable, taking action, and if there's no corresponding action, getting creative and trying to identify ways that you can actually help yourself move through that experience of worry. Okay, strategy number 3. This one should be familiar to you, and I've written down at the bottom, remember the ABCDE process. So, this is a strategy for working with worry. So, in that A portion of ABCDE, you guys early on in the semester did this in class, and with A, you were supposed to be identifying the adversity. So, um, you know, what you might identify, I'll give you an example. Maybe I would be identifying the adversity as maybe passing my classes. And then B, beliefs. The beliefs are those automatic thoughts. So, what are the automatic thoughts that are going through my head about passing my classes? And it might be, what if I don't get a good grade on this test? What if I can't pass my class and I'm not able to transfer? So you're going to be writing down in letter B all of those automatic thoughts. And then in letter C, consequences, where you identify what feelings come up when I think those automatic thoughts. And you probably are going to get feelings like overwhelm, nervousness, worry, fear. Um, Also, in the consequences, you were asked to identify behavior changes. How is your behavior changing as a result of those automatic thoughts? What things have I started doing? What things have I stopped doing? And then D. D is the most important part of this strategy. D is disputation, where you sit down and you actually write a more helpful way to think about this. So with the disputation, how you write your disputation is going to depend a bit on what it feels like you need. Do you need to be comforted? Do you need to be motivated? Do you need to be encouraged? What kind of a thought pattern could you think that would help alleviate the worry and also truly be a more helpful way to think about the adversity? And then E is energization. And with E, you're just recording, okay, how do you feel now as a result of going through this ABCDE process? So I would encourage all of you, if you have not reviewed that process, or if you've not maybe sat down with yourself and done it on your own, since we did the activity in class, this is a perfect strategy for working with those anxious thoughts or those worrisome thoughts. And I think especially if the worry is not solvable, if there's no concrete action that you can be taking. Wow, To me, it would be worry, okay, solvable or not, not solvable. Okay, I'm going to sit down with myself and do A, B, C, D, E. That would be one way of working with worry. Okay, strategy number 4, I think this is a really great thing to consider. Um, it says, be aware of how others affect you. So, strategy number 4 is for some of us, it might apply more than for others, but it's asking us to really think about, um, who we communicate with, who we hang out with, what impact do they have on us. Um, and this says, spend less time with people who make you anxious and or set boundaries. So, are there individuals in your life that you invest time with, but really what comes out of it is worry, anxiety, fearfulness? Are there some different boundaries that you could be establishing? Um, you know, with various contacts or with various environments that you participate in. And then the second part, I always smile when we cover this because I can relate to this so much. It says, choose your confidants carefully. It says some individuals may help you gain perspective, while others will feed into your worries, doubts, and fears. Okay, so I know I have different I have friends that offer different things to me. And I have friends that when I talk to them, boy, the experience is so wonderful. It feels like some of the worry can just kind of melt away. And I have also some friends that if I discuss worries with them, the tendency is for the worry and fear to just grow. We tend to, maybe when we talk together, we continue to talk about the worry, and in our conversation create maybe 6 or 10 additional scary scenarios that could happen. So the idea here is to identify who it is that's most helpful to talk to, and to be sure and go to those people in times of stress and worry. Um, there's this expression, co-rumination. First of all, rumination is this process of going over something, maybe it could be verbally, but a lot of times it's just ourselves up in our head where we just go over something and over it and over it. That's called ruminating on things. And a lot of times this happens with worry or with things that we're concerned about. We'll just stay up in our head and go over it and over it and over it. Co-rumination is kind of what I described to you of how maybe with some of our friends, when we get together and talk to them, it becomes this process of co-rumination where my friend and I are maybe just going over all the problems and over the problems and over what could happen and what other scary thing could happen. So that's that term, co-rumination. So identify who actually helps you alleviate stress, and who are those people that you maybe have more of a tendency to co-ruminate with, and then be wise. And when you are feeling worried, go to the person that helps alleviate the worry. Okay, now this oftentimes gets listed as a strategy for working with worry, and I've kind of just put it on a slide all by itself for this semester, accepting uncertainty. And oh wow, right now, this is like we're in the midst of this huge opportunity to practice this. Right now, there are so many things that are uncertain. I feel like this whole semester for me has been a practice of accepting I don't know or we don't know. The thing is when there is uncertainty, for some of us, there can be more of a tendency to worry. So we create in our mind these maybe scary outcomes when the reality or the truth is we just don't know. So the better we can stay with just not knowing versus imagining that it's going to be bad or imagining that it's going to be awful or it's not going to be what we want, the better. And, with regard to this whole, the stay at home order and social distancing, all of this, the more you can just stay right in the moment and understand that right now, we just don't know. So the best place to stay is, in this moment. This is what I do know. I'm here right now. I'm working on this and I'm doing the best job I can. And we'll just see. Easier said than done. And I know with college, there's so many uncertainties. I bet a lot of you in class um, are in the process or maybe have been applying to go to colleges elsewhere, or maybe you're applying for jobs and you're living with a lot of uncertainty. It may also be related to your work. And so pay attention with uncertainty. Pay attention to yourself. Are you creating scary stories? And the more you can identify it and just kind of smile and go, oh, wow, I just did that. I was creating a scary story. And then come back into what's real, what's true. That's that's going to be helpful. So hang in there with this one. Okay, so those are just some of the strategies for helping ourselves cope a little more effectively with worry and strategies for helping ourselves feel better when we're experiencing worry. And if you haven't yet checked out the worry activity for the week, now's a good time to head on over there and take a look at it. It's like an 8-minute video, instructional video, and I've got the form posted. And go ahead and turn this week into a practice period for yourself. Okay, I will talk to you soon, and have a good rest of your day.